Welcome. Today, we're going to try and piece something pretty big together. We're looking at classical texts, modern devotionals, and even spiritual lectures, all to try and map out one of the most profound questions we all have, but from an Islamic perspective. What exactly happens on the soul's journey after death? I mean, it's a question we all think about at some point, isn't it? For centuries, believers have been diving deep into scripture and scholarship, looking for answers, searching for a kind of map for this ultimate journey. And it turns out there's been one classic text that has served as a really detailed map for this unseen world. Our main guide for this explainer is a landmark 14th century work by the scholar al-Qayyim al-Jawziyya. It's called Kitab, al-Roh, which translates to the Book of the Soul. Okay, so let's get right into it. The first big idea is about the soul after death, about unveiling the unseen. The foundational belief here is that the soul doesn't just end when the body does. Islamic theology says that it's a conscious, distinct entity that continues to exist right after physical death, and it's basically beginning a whole new phase of its existence. And, the Book of the Soul isn't just a simple list of declarations. Not at all. It's a really deep, systematic investigation that grapples with these incredibly profound questions people have been asking for centuries. Questions like, do the souls of the dead actually meet up and visit each other? Can the souls of the living and the dead ever meet? Is the torment in the grave something for the body, the soul, or both? Where do souls actually reside between death and the day of resurrection? And, maybe most practically, do the dead get any benefit from the things the living do for them? It really shows a tradition that is deeply engaged with the details of this unseen reality. So if the soul continues to exist, the next logical question is, where does it go? And this leads us to the first and absolutely pivotal stage of the afterlife, the world of the grave, also known as the intermediate state. This state is known by the Quranic term Barzakh. Now, what does that mean? Well, think of it as a kind of barrier or a realm that's in between. It's not the world we know now, but it's also not the final hereafter of heaven or hell. It is a transitional existence. And this is the crucial point. The Barzakh is not some neutral waiting room. Islamic tradition describes it in really stark, dualistic terms. For the righteous, the grave is described as a preview of paradise, like a garden of bliss. But for the wicked, it's a precursor to hell, a pit of torment. This reality is what makes the state of the grave so incredibly significant for believers. So this belief in the grave's dual nature isn't just some abstract theological concept to ponder. It inspires a very practical, very heartfelt response from the living for those who have passed on. Believers turn to prayer, like this supplication you'll often hear recited at funerals. It's a direct plea, an act of entrusting the departed soul to God's mercy, and specifically asking for protection from this very first, very critical trial. Now, beyond general prayers, there's a specific number that has become deeply associated with this idea of protection: 30. But why this number? What's so special about 30? Well, the number 30 corresponds to the 30 verses in a specific chapter of the Quran called Surah al-Mulk, or the chapter of dominion. It's a widespread practice for believers to recite this chapter regularly, holding on to the hope that it will intercede on their behalf and act as a shield for them in the grave. Okay, so we've moved from belief to specific actions. Now let's talk about the internal mindset behind it all. This entire worldview is driven by a profound psychological balance between two core spiritual states. Think of it as the spiritual engine. There's this brilliant analogy that illustrates the dynamic perfectly. In a lecture, Dr. Eamon Swade compares Hof, or fear of God's justice, to the brakes on a car. It's what stops you from being reckless and crossing boundaries. Then you have Raja, or hope in God's mercy. That's the engine. It's what propels you forward, what prevents you from just stalling out in despair or guilt over your mistakes. You need both to journey safely. And here's another powerful, classic analogy. A bird can't fly with just one wing, right? It's the same idea. Fear alone, without hope, leads to despair. But hope alone, without a healthy sense of fear, can lead to complacency. A believer needs both wings, fear of God's justice and hope in His vast mercy, to truly soar spiritually. And what's fascinating is that this balance isn't static. It's not always 50-50. Spiritual teachers have suggested that in the heat of youth, when your impulses are strong, it's wise to lean a bit more on the wing of fear to act as a restraint. But as you get older and approach the end of your life, having faced your shortcomings, it's encouraged to lean more heavily on the wing of hope, to really trust in God's infinite capacity for forgiveness. So how do all these pieces, the theology, the rituals, the spiritual psychology, how do they all fit together? Let's bring it all into focus and look at the ultimate takeaway. So what we see is a clear, practical progression. It all starts with the core belief that the soul's journey continues. This belief creates an awareness of the grave's profound reality, the fact that it's either a garden or a pit. In turn, that awareness inspires tangible action, like specific prayers and reading scripture, and guiding the whole thing is that internal spiritual balance between fear and hope, the engine that powers a believer's entire life. And that brings us to our final thought. This entire framework, mapped out over centuries, isn't just about dying. It's really about living. It raises a universal question for all of us, no matter what our path is. How does our vision of the end ultimately define our journey, right here and now?